My name is Vicky. Sitting on my bed, clutching a worn-out diary with a faded leather cover, I'm still reeling from the revelations within its pages. This diary has shattered everything I've ever believed about my family and the old man next door. I remember the day of his funeral like it was etched in ice. It was a cold, somber affair. I was 29 then, and that morning, an ambulance had stopped outside his house. By evening, the old man who had been a silent presence in my life for nearly 3 decades was gone. A few days later, I stood alone in a small, desolate cemetery. The wind was blowing softly through the trees, and the priest's voice echoed eerily over the empty rows of chairs. I kept looking around, hoping against hope that someone, anyone, would show up. Maybe a distant relative or an old friend. But I was the only one there. It felt so surreal, as if I was in a dream where the rules of reality didn't apply. After the short, solemn ceremony ended, a tall man in a dark suit approached me. He introduced himself as the old man's lawyer. His eyes studied me intently, as if he'd been waiting for me. I was confused. I told him I was just a neighbor's daughter and barely knew the man. With a small, knowing smile, he reached into his briefcase and pulled out this diary. "He asked me to give this to you," he said calmly, placing it in my hands. My heart skipped a beat. "To me?" I stammered. He nodded firmly. That night, I sat on my bed, the lamp dimmed. I stared at the diary for so long, almost afraid to open it. Finally, I gathered the courage and turned the first page. The handwriting was neat and precise, dated nearly 30 years ago, the year my family moved into this neighborhood. My parents, Leonard and Olivia, were an odd couple. Leonard was a strict and short-tempered businessman. He was always worried about what others thought and was quick to judge. Olivia was more cautious and secretive. She was constantly on edge, and her nerves seemed to be frayed all the time. For as long as I could remember, they had hated the old man, Mr. Thompson, with a fear that made no sense to me. Whenever his name came up, their voices would turn sharp and uneasy. They'd call him strange, say he watched people too closely, and warned me to stay far away from his property. "Don't even glance at him," my mother would whisper urgently as we passed his house. My father went further, calling him a monster and a pervert, as if he was a lurking danger. And for years, like a naive child, I believed them. But deep down, curiosity burned within me. Sometimes, from my bedroom window, I'd see Mr. Thompson in his small garden. He'd be slowly watering his flowers or sitting on an old wooden chair, jotting things down in a notebook. He never looked menacing to me, just lonely, like a lost soul. Yet, I never dared to wave or say hello. My parents' rules were like ironclad laws. As I continued reading the diary, my name first appeared when I was a baby. Mr. Thompson wrote about seeing my mother carry me into the house and hearing me cry through the open window on warm summer nights. At first, it felt strange, just as my parents had warned. But his words didn't carry a sense of creepiness or threat, instead, they felt protective. He recounted a time when I was 7 and fell off my bike in the street. He rushed outside to check on me, but my father angrily told him to stay away. As I read these words, my chest tightened. This man wasn't the villain my parents had painted him to be, he was someone quietly looking out for me. Then, I reached the entry from the night my parents warned me again never to go near him. Tonight they warned her about me again. I understand their fear, but one day she deserves to know the truth about who I really am to her, he wrote. My hands started to tremble. As I turned the pages, the entries became more personal and almost painful to read. He knew so much about my life, my struggles at school, the time I ran away from home for a few hours when I was 16, and the night I cried alone in the backyard after my first breakup. It was as if he'd been an invisible guardian. At first, fear crept into my chest. I began to question everything my parents had told me. But then, there was an entry that changed everything. He explained that he never watched me out of curiosity but because he felt responsible for me. The word responsible was so puzzling. Why would a stranger feel that way? Further back in the diary, about 28 years ago, I found the answer that would shatter my world. It was revealed that before I was born, my parents had faced years of infertility. After countless failed attempts to have a child, they secretly sought help from Mr. Thompson. He had once been very close to my mother, long before she married my father. My parents had come to his house late one night, nervous and desperate. They begged him to keep this secret, fearing that if it ever got out, it would destroy our family. In return, they demanded that he stay silent about his connection to me and let them raise me without interference. The quiet neighbor I'd been taught to fear was actually the man who made my existence possible. He'd spent nearly 3 decades living beside me, watching over me from afar, while I thought he was a monster. The last entry, written just a week before his death, was written in shaky yet careful handwriting. He said he never blamed my parents for their decision. They were afraid the secret would ruin their family and marriage, so they created a story where he was the bad guy. For them, it was easier for me to fear him than to question his close proximity. He wrote that he never needed recognition or forgiveness, only hoped that one day I'd understand why he'd stayed silent for so long. As I closed the diary, a wave of heartbreak washed over me. The man everyone had avoided had been the unsung hero in my life, a quiet guardian whose love and protection had been hidden behind a false facade. Now, as I sit here, I realize that the truth is often far more complex than we can imagine. The lines between good and bad, friend and foe, are not as clear-cut as we'd like to believe. And Mr. Thompson, the old man next door, will always remain in my heart as the silent protector who sacrificed so much for my well-being.